A couple of days ago on the channel, we sat down and had a chat about F1 and WRC Rally coming over to PSVR2 in the future, possibly. We know it's probably not going to happen at the moment, but there's also the chance in the future that it could. Representatives from EA have said it's an ongoing conversation, and while it isn't happening for F1 24, maybe for F1 25 if we push hard enough, we'll see. But since then, I decided to do some investigative journalism, and by that, I mean I installed F1 23 and had a go in its VR mode to see really how good it was in my mid-tier PC that can run most games pretty well in VR. Mostly to see whether the issues that I heard were there at launch had been improved on and fixed now, and what work would have to be done to ensure it would be a good PSVR2 port when it eventually does come over, considering each VR version of the game kind of iterates on the one that came before. So, without further ado, let's dive into the unfortunate mess of F1 23 in VR, but also have a look at how parts of this game really shine through and show how it could be something really special. But before that, let me throw my obligatory please subscribe if you're new and enjoying the content at all. I mean, I don't know how you know you're enjoying the content, we're a minute in, but if you do feel like subscribing, only 20% of my view base actually is, and we're on a road to 10,000 subs at the moment, so any support and help with that is appreciated. Anyway, I'll get out your hair with all this announcement stuff now. Let's get on to the actual content of the video. One of the main issues that I heard at launch was that the game simply doesn't look good. Now, I've played a couple of PC VR driving sim racing games, and same on PSVR2. I've had the pleasure of playing Gran Turismo 7 on PSVR2, a game that uses eye-tracked foveated rendering to look absolutely lovely, but it's not to say that every single driving sim needs this to look good. I played BeamNG in VR, I've played Assetto Corsa, and both those games look absolutely stunning when on mid to high tier equipment that you're running them on. Now, it is important to talk about the headset that I'm using for this game, and that is the DPVR E4. It uses a panel that is the same as the Quest 2, but uses DisplayPort as a link instead of USB when wired, meaning that there's no compression at all. That being said, the image quality here for F1 23 is far below what I would expect from similar settings on games such as Assetto Corsa or BeamNG running in similar setups. It's a similar situation that I see to a lot of PSVR2 games that come out underbaked. You look at close-up objects and they look very, very clear, but as soon as you gaze off slightly into the distance, or in this case, quite far into the distance, because these tracks are very long with certain sections and cover quite a few miles, therefore visual clarity over distance is something that should be prioritized, but unfortunately, past, say, 20 meters, things do feel like a bit of a blurry mess. I heard this was sort of similar with F1 22, however, I heard the performance was also better, so you could crank it up to, say, max settings on lower end hardware, whereas here, to perform comfortably at 120 FPS I have to be running on medium, which should, on other VR games, look fairly okay. Or if I want to run at 80 FPS, I'll run at high settings, and even then the game doesn't look that great overall. That being said, this 120 FPS and 80 FPS standard that we're talking about is a problem within itself. When you're driving around on track and actually immersed as you're racing, the game feels quite smooth. It feels like the frame rate that it's running at, but as soon as you start to turn your head or become stationary at all as you turn your head, some weird jittering starts to take place. Now, I've had some tracking issues with bad lighting with my DPVR E4 in the past playing games that are really intensive like Blade and Sorcery. However, I set up this perfectly, and in a sim rig, you're being quite still, so the tracking should have no problem. So it's not an issue with the tracking, it just seems to be an issue with how the game interpolates your head movement and tries to smooth things over, but instead makes it feel like there's some sort of jitter or lag in being introduced into the movements that you're making with your head, making your stationary experiences in the paddock, in the pit lane, and on track before the race starts pretty disorienting. And while I've been playing VR for quite a few years, so this didn't make me feel sick, I can definitely see first-time VR users jumping into this and feeling pretty horrendous. The VR mode for 24 needs to improve on this, and I hope it has, because this is probably one of the biggest issues that I ran into. Another pretty big issue was menus. More specifically, the fact that they decide to just kind of go wherever they want to after a race is done. When you boot up the game, you can use your recenter button, which I mapped on my steering wheel, to what would be the share button on PlayStation, to recenter your screen in the normal social screen view that you'd see, say, on PSVR2 when you're looking through normal menus that are flat, like in Gran Turismo. As soon as you select a race and go in, you're put into full VR, but before that, as you navigate menus, it is just a floating screen. However, this recenter button stopped working after I completed a race. I'd press recenter, and instead of recentering the screen in front of me, it would try and recenter above me or to the left, or wherever it decided it would want to be placed. I had no control over this, and it just kind of had to take me along for the ride, which was quite disappointing, as it meant I had to switch back to the real world and use my monitor to navigate menus, which isn't a deal breaker, but it is a bit of an immersion blocker as you're trying to keep the headset on and keep immersed into the world that you're in. Now, that's not to say that everything that was broken at launch hasn't been fixed, because saying that would simply not be true. At launch, light sources were completely broken. Let's say you're driving in Bahrain at night. You've got the big floodlights shining down on the track, and unfortunately at launch, if you jumped into this experience, you would see the floodlights and then the light source from the floodlights be rendered in different places depending on which eye you were looking through. From what I heard, that was absolutely jarring and disorienting, and kind of felt like you were being abducted by a UFO as there were floating lights all over the track. A similar method was used to render water droplets, which, luckily from my testing, have been fixed now. I'm getting completely symmetrical water droplets like GT7 does with the windscreens in that game, making it so that it's not an absolute dysfunctional mess when driving in the rain. Speaking of wet races, however, when looking at F1 22 compared to 23's footage, 23 has a lot less intensive and immersive spray. There's no fog from the rain kicked up during rainy races, it seems, and I feel like this is just a bug that hopefully they iron out for 24, or maybe it was a performance thing that they really just couldn't get working. But rain here is okay, but don't expect massive amounts of spray and fog like you would actually see in a track while you're driving in a real F1 car. Now, I feel like I've just absolutely ragged on the game for 7 minutes, and I should stop now because I've reached pretty much the end of my complaints. Sure, the performance can be horrendous depending on what settings you are running. Sure, the jittering is pretty horrendous, but when you're at speed, you don't really notice it. And it's in those moments where the game comes together with the official F1 car models on the official models of the tracks, with the drivers around you, and especially when you're playing a multiplayer, the game just comes alive at those high speeds and everything for a moment feels right. Your eyes glaze over the fact that past 30 meters in front of you, it looks like a PSVR1 game, and you become immersed, which I think is incredibly special. They're onto something here, they really are. Even the Super Formula races on Gran Turismo 7 don't get me feeling like I'm racing in F1, because obviously they're not F1, but the speeds are fairly similar at points, and I feel like GT7 gets a sense of speed better in VR than F1 does. But there's something about the official F1 experience, but translated to virtual reality, that holds something even more special in some instances. If they could just get it fixed up and have the resources poured into it to make it optimized, run well, and get rid of this jitter and some of these issues, and polish it all out, it would be truly incredible. And I'm hoping for F1 24 that that is the case and that does end up happening. And then who knows, maybe for F1 25, PSVR2 could get in the mix. But if it does, I'd like to see a lot of these issues fixed too. Dynamic foveated rendering could definitely be brought to the table to make performance and visuals a lot better than they are currently on the PC VR version. I have a 6700 XT, which I think is about similar to a PS5 in terms of raw power. Don't quote me on that, I am an idiot, but from what I read, it's kind of similar, and I feel like a PS5 could run this game better with DFR enabled, of course, and truly give F1 a chance to be something special. And there are so many gamers I know that on PSVR 2 would love to play this game. It's one of my most common comments on my GT7 and racing videos that people want F1 in VR on PSVR 2. And I can't say I blame them. I want that too. If I had the option to play it with DFR enabled on PSVR 2, I would, because as much as I love PC VR, there are a lot more hoops to jump through to get this up and working. Because for this setup, I had to set up my wheel, install the drivers for my wheel on my PC, make sure Steam VR was running at the same time as EA app, but not open it at the same time because sometimes it would completely mess up. On top of that, introduce the DPVR E4 Assistant on top of it so it could all run well, same as the Oculus Assistant opens up a Quest. And then even after doing all that, sometimes the game would just break and spawn the menus behind me. Compare that to the simple plug and play PSVR 2, I know what I would want. But that being said, I still did have a really good time as an F1 fan playing 23 in VR for the first time. And I do truly believe, even if they are just going to stick to PC VR, that they are onto something here, and I hope they get the resources needed to push it in the right direction instead of degrading it as it seemed to have done from 22 to 23's port. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you to our patrons, Luke Bentley, Phil Irving, Hazit Mirza, Ace Gamer, and Hippie Pickle. Thank you to our YouTube member, Jin007, a license to chill, and thank you to all of you for watching. I hope you did enjoy, and I hope to see you all in the next one.